Welcome. I'm Ron Baker, the director of the Canadian Small Church Ministry Center, sponsored by Small Church Connections. And this is us, Canadian Small Churches in Action podcast. I kind of like that introduction. That kind of went well today. Well, anyways, let's move to our guest for today. And I'll let him introduce himself and maybe just talk a little bit about his own ministry journey and what he's been up to. And I think I'll just leave it at that. So take it away, Arch.
Thanks, Ron. And thank you for the kind invitation to be with you today. My name is Arch Wong, and I'm a professor of practical theology at Ambrose University. I'm also the associate director of the Flourishing Congregations Institute. And so I think that's probably why Ron invited me today to talk about work there.
I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say about some of that work. That's going to be great.
Yeah, me too, Ron. So,
okay.
Yeah. So before coming to Ambrose and being the associate director of the Institute, I was a pastor for about 10 years at a Chinese church in Toronto. And one of the passions for me in pastoring was in the area of spiritual formation and discipleship. So those things were very much of an interest and passion and wanting to see people grow in their faith, but also people coming to the faith, and watching their faith journey start and continue.
Mm-hmm. Well, you said you were in Toronto for about 10 years. What was the journey leading up to that? I presume you went through schooling. You probably did all sorts of other things. Yeah, I'll let you keep going on that. See.
Oh, sure. Serving in a Chinese church, as you can kind of see, I'm Chinese, I'm Asian, so just had a heart for people ministry, particularly say second and third generations folks, and just the way that their faith formation, their development as a human being, but as a follower of Jesus was very important to me, and really thought about that in terms of what does that kind of look like in a congregational setting. And so a lot of my own interests really started in that pastoral ministry, trying to understand and see what God is doing in congregations in Canada, and particularly in my context, where I was in Toronto, was extremely important.
I think one of the things that I'm finding, Arch, is that the world is changing and Canada is changing, and you talked about Chinese alliance churches Chinese churches that you've been involved with, different approaches that people have in different places. I'm in a rural church, small rural church. It is nothing like small Toronto church. Well, I shouldn't say nothing like, but there's a whole different culture that goes along with that, and it makes a difference in how I approach people. The pastoring that I'm doing right now, I have to have context constantly and understand that. Yeah. So for us in our town, in the last 20 years, our town has gone basically from being a monocultural town into probably a third, well, not quite a third, but getting up there, Filipino.
Right.
It just makes for a whole different approach to ministry and what's a flourishing congregation? How do you get there? What does it look like? Okay, which brings me to all sorts of questions about what you've been doing with flourishing congregations and maybe helping us out as smaller churches to understand some of that whole thing of how we can be a flourishing church.
Right. Yeah. Let me start off with the Institute's maybe mission, really, for us. is really to provide good empirical research for the Canadian church context. I mean, things that come out from the US or from the UK or Australia, all good data and all good work and research. But we found that there needed to be more a Canadian flavor, so to speak, and really then taking seriously the Canadian context, which is quite what should I say, multicultural, diverse in lots of ways in terms of gender, race, sexuality, and so on and so forth. So, I just find that to be really interesting in terms of the context. Like Canada is so broad, and a lot of our research is national, from coast to coast to coast to coast.
Yeah. Well, I guess I'm a little biased. I sort of have been watching since the Institute began a number of years ago, and knowing a number of you that have been involved in it, that you have had some very unique, there's a niche that Flourishing Congregations has found in Canada. I've no doubt about that. Now, your founders and those that sort of head up the congregation, the Flourishing Congregations Institute, can you maybe just run through some of who those people are and what they're doing, and very unique backgrounds that have contributed to this?
Yeah, sure, Ron. There's how we started was with the four of us. Basically, Joel Thiessen, who is a sociology of religion person, and we needed a good sociologist, I should say, on the team. And Joel brings that background, working with congregations, but also some of his areas is around religious nuns. Not nuns meaning NONS, religious nuns. And so Joel is actually the director of the Institute. And then folks that are other members of the team are Keith Walker from the University of Saskatchewan, and then Bill McAlpine. Bill is just retired several years ago, so he does work with us here and there. But we do miss Bill. But he brings a lot of good wisdom. But those are basically the four of us who started the Institute, and again to provide good empirical data so that the church in Canada can flourish.
Mm-hmm. I just finished a podcast with Wendy McCready, who had completed her doctorate with Keith Walker at the university, and I just found it so interesting to have that input from a very broad interdisciplinary sort of approach. That you guys have very unique. I would love to sit around the table with you four guys and just sort of hear what the discussion is and where you're going and what you're coming up with. How did you guys come up with sort of a sense of what the ethos was for flourishing churches, and how would even a small church look at, are they flourishing, aren't they? What kind of things are you looking at?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. We wanted to.
We only have 30 minutes, so I know how long that could.
Yeah, I mean, we were looking at a broad spectrum across ecclesial families. So basically, from Catholic to mainline and conservative Protestants, to small churches, to larger churches, medium-sized churches, urban, rural distinctions. And so a lot of our work covers that demographic. And so some of our conversations is to think about flourishing in the sense of what does that kind of look like, and what does it mean for, say, in a small congregation or a rural congregation, or what does flourishing mean for a large urban church?
Yeah.
And so what does that kind of mean for them? And what we found, I just found that really interesting, especially around the earlier research that we did, and finding that really flourishing, regardless of theological traditions, they stress various dimensions. Some ecclesial families emphasize one thing more than the other.
Oh, definitely.
And so we found that there was sort of various understandings of it. And it all depends on context. In ministry, it's always context,
Yeah.
right?
Yes. Yeah.
And so we found that was sort of the case. And so a great example for us was when we asked about diversity. Say in a United Church of Canada, it may be more of an important quality for flourishing than, say, in a conservative Protestant church, right?
Yeah.
And yet it might be significant still for that conservative Protestant church, but it seems for a conservative Protestant church, though it's important, they might have other things that are just as important for them. When we talk about diversity, some congregations and ecclesial families emphasize on race or ethnicity or socioeconomic, status, or sexuality or gender and leadership. Ron. So that's one of the things that we found, and what we wanted to ask ourselves really is this: instead of asking ourselves, and this is our team approach, is that instead of asking what's wrong with the church, we're asking what's right with the church.
Okay.
And that was sort of our perspective going into that. And when you're asking what is right with the church, we found that it's very generative. Okay. And it provided some really good conversations for us with various church leaders and congregants that we contacted and had some really good conversations with.
Yeah. I find it interesting that over time, when the Institute was first beginning, the question was what makes thriving, and now you've sort of got a pattern that you're working with, that you see, and you sort of say, well, is this happening? Is that happening? And what is generating the thriving?
Yeah.
What would you say are the basic areas that show? Okay, maybe not even show it. It may show you're positive, may show you're negative, but what is a thriving church? What kind of okay, you guys got a nice circle pattern that I just love on your flourishingcongregations.org website, and I passed it on to some students this fall, first year Bible college, second year Bible college students, and all of a sudden a light came on. And they said, oh yeah, I get that. So maybe you can just outline some of that quickly, and even if how have you gotten to that point of saying this is where it's at?
I think for us that comes out of our research. So we had a research project that we're continuing to work on, and basically had three phases, Ron. And the first phase was basically we did interviews with just a little bit over 110 pastoral leaders throughout Canada, and basically from Vancouver to Halifax. And so really that construct is that construct comes from those interviews that we did with pastoral leaders from all theological traditions, from Catholics to mainline Protestants and to conservative Protestants, evangelicals. And so that's where those 11 constructs or dimensions really came from. And so you can check, as you mentioned, our Flourishing Congregations.org website, and it'll give you just a quick definition of what those constructs or dimensions are. So three areas really: organizational ethos, and then internal and outward. I know you're probably thinking to yourself, we probably could have come up with more creative and snappy names, but hey, we're academics. Yeah, we're academics. So, that's sort of what we came up with. And under those three domains, let's call it that, were these 11 constructs. And so, for example, in organizational ethos, we talked about, a clear self-identity, leadership, innovation, structures and processes. When we talked about internal, we're thinking about discipleship. We're talking about community, hospitable community, laity, diversity. And when we talk about outward, we're thinking about neighborhood involvement, evangelism, and partnerships. Those are just very briefly what those 11 constructs are. And so we wanted to, in some ways, test them, because they come from pastoral leaders, right? Yep. And as a researcher, you're kind of asking, are pastoral leaders, are they a good source of data and information? And the answer is yes and no. Right, exactly. Right? And so, in fact, some of our interviews, yes, these are some of the variables that contribute to flourishing. But also, we realized they were aspirational. Some of them pastoral were aspirational, right? Yeah, definitely. They were hoping that's the way that they're moving, right, towards. Yep. And so that's basically how we kind of came up with those constructs, again, based on those interviews, but also on the literature. There is a lot of literature written in these areas. And
let me just ask you, I'm going to interrupt your train of thought, sorry here, but it just came to my mind. When you think of the literature, have you got one book or one article or one thing that you would say, hey, this was the best, okay, maybe not the best, but one of the best articles, books, whatever, that I have on flourishing congregations? I gotcha.
Yeah, there's so many.
There's so many, yeah.
Yeah.
It's like asking a musician, what's your favorite song?
Yeah, you're going to have to come back to me on that one. I need to think about that. But I think about, they both come from a theological perspective, because
definitely.
I'm more of a theologian. And what I've learned a lot is around the sociology of religion, mainly Joel's area, right? And many things, many learnings, at least for me, there, and trying to understand the literature around that. A lot of my interests actually are both theologically and sociologically. Is what I find interesting really is the ones around racial and ethnic churches. Yeah. And also around the whole area of discipleship and about evangelism too. So I can give you the areas, Ron, but one particular article or chapter, there's just a lot out there. So I'm gonna have to think about that some more.
Okay. Well,
sorry, not a good answer.
And at some point, if I see you jump up and grab a book off your bookshelf, then I'll know what you're doing.
Right, yeah.
Okay, so we're looking at flourishing congregations in small churches. If I was a pastor, what would I, and I am a pastor in a small church, so how would I describe my church as flourishing, or when would I, or I'm just trying to get a handle on me. I can, organizational, there's the internal, there's an external, all those type of things.
Right.
Sunday morning we laughed in church. Is that a thriving congregation? Is that
right.
flourishing?
Right.
I'm okay. I'll let you just run with that. I'm not even sure there's an answer to it, but
yeah, I mean, what we've kind of found is that there's no perfect church.
Okay.
Or perfect congregation where all these 11 constructs are working and humming at 100%, right? That doesn't exist. What we have found is that congregations, regardless if they're small church, and I would say for small church pastors, if they are flourishing in one area, say leadership, and they may be flourishing in other areas as well, say in discipleship, but they may not be flourishing in other areas.
Mm-hmm.
And so is that a flourishing congregation? At least when we chatted with pastoral leaders throughout Canada, we didn't come up with a definition of what flourishing is. We wanted, again, that's generative, and we wanted to kind of have the data kind of lead us into what that actually means. So what we found is that flourishing happens in various aspects, and also various times in the life cycle of a church. Mm-hmm. In some areas, engaging a laity might be a very strong time where that's happening in a congregation, and then at other times it may not be. Sometimes, it may be a combination of those variables where, a leader has left, or a leader who's very much champions, that particular aspect of flourishing may have left the congregation for some reason. And so there is that life cycle, and there is that sense. So I think what I would encourage, especially small church leaders, is not to have this sort of defeatist tendency, or even to look at bigger churches, because really, if ministry is context, then I don't think you need to compare, right?
Okay.
You look at these areas where you're kind of thinking flourishing. Yeah, I'm flourishing in this area, but in this area, maybe as church leadership, we need to kind of think and maybe think about that a bit more, and to see ways that we may implement or find strategies to make that better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I sort of laugh where you were saying context, because I'm with you on that. I think that just makes all the difference. It's sort of like a real estate agent saying, well, look, it's location.
Yeah.
It is context. If I wanted to take what I'm doing here in a local church and go to Toronto and hang out downtown and say, here's how you should do church, it's not going to work.
Right.
And, we just need to keep reminding ourselves that that's the way life is.
And so I think oftentimes what our research has done, Ron, is that it just confirms, or sometimes it disconfirms our notions of what flourishing is, and what a flourishing congregation looks like.
Now, I like the book that you guys put out. Have you got a copy sitting right there?
Oh,
You want to wave it in front of us?
well, this one, Science
Signs
of
of
Life.
Life. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you. And thank you for the nice review that you provided for us too. So that was great. Very much appreciate it.
Yeah.
And that book actually is it is actually from a national survey that we did. Mm-hmm. So remember I mentioned that, our pastoral leaders, reliable sources of information? Yeah. And the answer is yes and no. Yes and no. So what we did, Rod, was that we asked congregants. Mm-hmm. So we asked just a little bit over 9,100 congregants, again, from various ecclesial families, and asked them about what flourishing is. And a lot of the national survey is based on the constructs, the variables that came from the interviews, actually, with the pastoral leaders. And so we found a lot of very much interesting things around that. So in the book, what we did was we unpacked that a bit more based on the survey data. And again, it's a non-representative sample. So when it's non-representative, we need to be just very, very careful about the conclusions that we make about that. I kind of look at it more like it gives us a good snapshot of congregational life in Canada, and what are the things that are helping it in terms of flourishing.
Yeah, I always like research because it takes me to the next question that I need to ask, and leads me to something further. And so I never discount what people are doing in research, and they don't have to cover everything, just cover some things, and then they'll push us on to the next thing. And it's great. You guys have done a great job in that. Now, where are you headed next?
Oh, where are we heading next? Well, we just actually came out with a national report on discipleship. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you had a chance to look at that. And you can, again, find that on our website and take a look at that, about what discipleship is. But then, we can talk a little bit about that if you want. The other thing that we're doing is now, from the national survey, is that we're moving to our case studies that are starting this fall. So we have, I think, about 10 to 11 collaborators that are working with Joel and Keith and I. Mm-hmm. And we're looking at case studies of various congregations throughout Canada. And from basically Vancouver, from Vancouver to Halifax again. And we have, so the three of us and our collaborators will be in congregations this fall, hopefully this fall, with with COVID restrictions and so on and so forth, from province to province. Mm-hmm. And spending anywhere between 8 to 10 to 11 weeks with a congregation. And trying to understand, in that particular context, what makes this congregation flourish. Yeah. So we're trying to understand that, what makes it flourish, and then what are the mechanisms that or pathways that help congregations to flourish. So that's sort of the second thing that we're doing. And I think the third thing that we're looking at as well is just to ask them questions and to look at their congregational history. Yeah. And their life cycle, to see, what is it? Are there things there that help flourish? Have there been past periods of that congregational's life that has helped them to flourish? And then really the fourth thing that we're looking then at is there general principles, and are there good and promising practices that arise from these case studies that could be helpful to other congregations in Canada. And so that's sort of the next phase. We're gathering data right now and beginning to set up these case studies throughout Canada. And hopefully we'll produce some helpful resources, both for the academy, but also for pastoral leaders and congregations.
Yeah.
And so that's what our hope is.
Okay, you've already got, you've taken me to the next step of, I have a whole bunch of questions. Art. And do you know what? I just looked at the clock. You see by the clock on the wall? It's time we quit. We're done. Sorry.
No.
we'll have to go over some of this again, because there are some things about histories of congregations that impact me, just because I love that study and
sure.
archives and all that sort of stuff. Just impressed. I'm waiting to see what comes out. Yeah, this is going to be great. But sorry, we're done.
No, it's perfectly fine.
went way too fast. I know.
Yeah. I mean, we didn't even have a. I could have talked more about that discipleship report.
Yeah. I would like to have. Yeah, that'd be good to have more of that one, because, well, anyways, that's one of your whole, spokes in your wheel, I suppose, in one sense. That it's very important for thriving. But yes, thank you very much for joining us today, and we probably will have to follow up on some of this afterwards. But
thanks, Ron. So I have fun editing.
Oh, I'm going to. I may just leave it run, and people say, "Whoa, they just keep going, don't they?" Yeah,
oh no, don't do that, Ron.
Okay. Well, thanks again.
Okay. Thanks, Ron.
All right.